From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Cheung, and this matters. Questions remain unanswered. What led to 29-year-old Regis Korchinski-Paquet's death before falling 24 floors from her High Park apartment? And what role does Toronto police play in the events of her death? Thousands of protesters marched peacefully this weekend through Toronto's streets.
Not another black life! Not another black life!
Demanding answers for how Korchinski-Paquet, an Afro-Indigenous woman, died while in the presence of police officers. Toronto Police Chief Mark Saunders says the call to the apartment was about an assault.
The call was for assaults and knives were involved. Knives were stated by at least 2 of the 3 people that called.
Korchinski-Paquet's family alleges police play a central role in her death.
I asked the police yesterday if they could take my daughter to Camp H, and my daughter ended up dead. So I don't understand.
Ontario's police watchdog has now started an investigation. This is all happening as mass protests sweep across the United States. Demonstrations against police violence and systemic racism against Black communities. Protests in more than 40 American cities from New York to LA are being met with riot police and tear gas. This wave of protest began first in Minneapolis, where that now infamous video of George Floyd's last moments were filmed. If you've seen it, you can never unsee it. A word of caution, the sounds you're about to hear are disturbing. The video goes on for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. George Floyd, a 46-year-old Black man, has been stopped by police and they have him on the ground. He screams for help again and again.
My stomach hurts. My neck hurts. Everything hurts. There's water or something. Please. I can't breathe, officer.
While a Minneapolis police officer, now charged with third-degree murder, knelt down on his neck until he stopped breathing. The anger over George Floyd's case and so many others who died in police interactions, from Eric Gardner to Breonna Taylor to Tamir Rice, is intertwined with the protests here in Canada over Regis Korchinski-Paquet's death. They are based on the same questions about how interactions between police officers and people of color disproportionately end in violence and death. Today, we have 2 guests. We're going to cover a lot of ground talking about police violence and how the community response to Regis's death in Canada is tied to the protests in the US. We're talking to Wendy Gillis, the Toronto Star's crime reporter who's been covering the death of Regis Korchinski-Paquet, and Kanika Samuels-Wortley, an incoming assistant professor at Carleton University and criminologist who has studied policing and the criminal justice system. Kanika, Wendy, thank you for making the time to go in depth with us on this today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
So Wendy, I'll start with you on the details of what happened to Regis Korchinski-Paquet, because the specifics of what led up to her death is exactly what's being contested here. What are the facts of the case that both sides, and by that I mean both police and family, that they actually agree on?
Yeah, so right now there is little that has been released officially, and there's a reason for that. This death is subject to an investigation by the Special Investigations Unit, which is the civilian police watchdog that comes in to scrutinize and investigate police actions that lead to death or serious injury or allegations of sexual assault. So that means that while they are conducting this investigation, there's sort of a shroud of secrecy that is put over top of the investigation while, the office is doing its work. That has been subject to quite a bit of controversy. We can get into that a little bit further about, transparency through the course of investigations. But suffice it to say, for now, the SIU has said that police were called to this apartment building and that police officers were present when Regis fell to her death. We don't know the nature of what happened inside her apartment unit. The information that we've been able to get out from the family is that they called because there was a family dispute underway and that Regis was in need of mental health help from the police. Apparently, her mother had said that she wanted Regis to be taken to CAMH for mental health support. So that's sort of what we know so far about what led up to the incident. And then according to the family, it was Regis who was inside the unit with police officers immediately before she fell to her death. And according to them, police did not allow any family member to go into the unit right before she died.
So picking up from that, where does that start to diverge of what police say happened and what Regis's family says happened and their allegations?
I think what we're able to say right now is that Regis's family does not understand how she came to die that night. They don't believe that she needed to die, and they think that police actions played some part in that. I think we saw early on, in the very early hours of this incident, allegations that police may have either pushed her or thrown her off of the balcony. The lawyer that is representing the family, Nia Singh, has said that, what is on the record from the family is what came out from the press conference they held on the evening of Thursday, which was about 24 hours after the incident.
After approximately 1 to 2 minutes, the mother and the brother heard commotion in the apartment and then heard Regis cry out, "Mom, help, mom, help, mom, help." After that, mother and brother heard silence.
They say they want to know what happened. They want accountability and justice, and they want some attention drawn to police actions when it involves someone in mental health crisis.
Kanika, this is your area of expertise. You study the relationships between Black communities and police in Canada. Even that difference of how Regis's family believes the situation played out compared to what police say happened. What do you think that says about how interactions between police and people of color often take on a very different tone and a very different outcome than white communities?
Certainly. So I think what the issue is here is, especially when there is an investigative body that is meant to look into police misconduct, there always seems to be a strong reluctance by police to admit to any wrongdoing. And as a result, it's members of the Black community who often feel that police have the upper hand in this investigation. Kind of as Wendy has mentioned, there's very little insight into what is going on into the process. And this has a huge impact on individuals especially individuals in the families who are involved in looking for answers, as they feel that they're expressing their story and they're trying to understand what has happened within an interaction. And a concern is expressed over police misconduct, but there's a denial is the first course of action, as opposed to demonstrating that there's going to be a thorough investigation. So in this case here, we see that the police chief has indicated that he would like to expedite the process, but that should be a process that should be done right away, where families should feel that they have answers really right away, as opposed to feeling that these investigations that generally can take months and sometimes even years to get answers, usually by the end of it, there really aren't any answers given. If there has been expressed police misconduct, often there are no repercussions for the officer or for the police service. There's no outcome to it, and that officer will still have a job, but they are these individuals where their lives have been impacted by an interaction with police, and there's nothing that recognizes the negative and severe impacts that happen to, and particularly for members of the Black community.
Or that the system is working against Black communities, that they are somehow not part of it.
Absolutely. They're not part of the investigation. Their voices are not heard. So, and as a result, there's very little trust in the process that looks into police misconduct or negative interactions with police. So as a result, there's very little trust in the process.
Wendy, when it comes to the investigation, why isn't it clear what happened to Regis after she went back into the apartment? Because my understanding is that Toronto police officers, they don't have body cameras.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously that's kind of the critical question here, is what happened in those final few seconds.
This is a textbook case as to why I've been advocating for body-worn cameras, and I'm now fast-tracking to the best of my ability to allow that process to speed up so we can have access to body-worn cameras as soon as possible.
As I was saying earlier, there is an investigation to protect. And just like, during the course of any average criminal investigation, sometimes police are, they hold certain information to their chest because they don't necessarily want it out to influence any sort of witness testimony or information that might come forward. They don't want to taint witness testimony, essentially. Understandably, I think for the first few days, while investigators are collecting information, doing canvasses of the area, getting security footage, and importantly, speaking to any witnesses, they don't tend to release much information. I think the interesting question now is, at what stage will we see more information come out, given the high profile nature of this? It's very interesting to go back and look at a review that was recently done in Ontario of the police oversight system by Justice Michael Tulloch, who was the first Black judge in Ontario's highest court. And after another very high-profile death involving a Black mentally ill man named Andrew Loku and the Toronto Police Service.
Yeah, the police are there. Okay, how did they get in?
I'm not sure. Nobody opened the door for them. Oh my God!
What was that?
Oh my God, there was gunshots. Oh my God, are you okay?
What was that?
The gunshots from the police officers.
The Loku family lawyer believes he was killed in part because he was Black. And the recommendations suggest the jury believes that too.
The response that we're seeing now following his death, saying, we don't necessarily trust the process here. There are way too many Black men and increasingly Black women who are dying in interactions with police, and we need to change the system. So Justice Tulloch reviewed how the SIU works, how oversight bodies, including the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, work, and importantly did a lot of community consultation to find out what communities think about these bodies and why they don't necessarily trust them. So as a result of that, there was a review and recommendations that were made that included requiring the Special Investigations Unit to be far more transparent about their work. And just in the last few days, I've been reviewing that report, and he identifies this very scenario where in the aftermath of an incident where someone dies from a fall in the presence of police, there is far too often a vacuum of information that is filled by, sometimes media speculation, that's what he said, or allegations from the public. And he says, without enough information, the public may wonder if police threw someone over a balcony. That's right from the report. It really underscores the importance of finding the right balance. And I'm not sure that I know where that line is between saving and making sure that an investigation is secure and not doing anything to taint it versus providing sufficient information to the public that they have a right to, right? I mean, the public here is served by the police and the SIU and deserves some answers, especially when there is some question about the conduct of the officers involved.
What's the literature around body cameras being a good first step when it comes to police accountability in these cases?
Body cameras have been discussed at length over years in Toronto, in Ontario, across Canada. I think lots of people will see this as a good step, but it's just been discussed for years. It's definitely not kind of a panacea. There's a lot that is complicated about it, including the cost. The cost involved is, the last time we got an update from the Toronto Police Service, they were estimating that it would be millions of dollars to even secure this technology, let alone to pay for the storage, various types of other administrative costs. And I think at a time when there's a lot of legitimate discussion around how much we're spending on policing.
Calls to defund the police, yeah.
Exactly. There may not be community and broad public support for a massive expenditure. On the other end, had there been body cameras that were on at the time, there would be another perspective on what actually happened inside that apartment unit. And Again, you don't necessarily know that footage would pick up exactly what happened. It was interesting to see with the George Floyd case, we obviously had citizen shot video of what happened, which has been the galvanizing force here in lots of ways to actually see what happened. But officer body cam footage didn't capture it nearly in the same way. So here again, we still needed citizen shot video to actually capture what happened.
Absolutely. And I would definitely agree with Wendy there. And there are also concerns with body cameras that police have access to turn it off whenever they need to. So if they feel that they're really, it comes down to their own discretion. So there is that opportunity if there might be a situation that might not be as pleasing as they would like to be seen, there is that opportunity to turn off that camera. And as Wendy has mentioned, the situation with George Floyd right now, it really is citizen footage that has provided insight into that incident as opposed to a body camera. It really isn't seen as the answer when dealing with members, especially of the Black community.
Kanika, with the investigation into Regis's death, in your opinion, what does transparency or trust in this process look like? You spoke about transparency before. What pathways do you think will make it clear for people that there is some sort of transparency in this case?
I think it's definitely right away expressing concern over the narrative that the family is putting forth. I think what early on in the investigation, what you saw was police were going to call this a suicide. And it was the family that came out right away and on social media that indicated that police are going to tell this narrative, but please don't believe it because this is what has happened. And I think that's what the problem is that there is, from the side of the police, there's just this quick denial of any misconduct. And I think where it begins is to acknowledge that there might be something that needs to be investigated and to state that right off the bat, as opposed to trying to massage a different narrative that takes away from a potential negative interaction that could have had an impact that unfortunately led to Regis's death. Right off the bat, they have to show that they're listening to the voices of the individuals that are expressing concern over interactions, as opposed to automatically saying that there has been no wrongdoing or just not speaking at all. So it really is to show concern that they are willing to go the extra mile to listen to what is being expressed by members of the community.
When we see Regis's death on a larger scope, and we see that yet again, there is a Black person, in this case, Afro-Indigenous, who, after interacting with police, ends up dead. Do you think it's fair to say that this case informs how we think about Devontae Miller's case?
Arriving at court this morning, Devontae appeared calm and focused. Michael Theriault, a Toronto police officer who was off duty at the time of the alleged incident, and his brother Christian Theriault are both charged with aggravated assault and obstruction of justice. On December 28, 2016, Miller alleges the two brothers ran him down and viciously beat him with a metal pipe for no apparent reason. The beating was so severe it caused Miller's left eye to explode in its socket. It later had to be surgically removed.
How we think of George Floyd's case, of Breonna Taylor, of countless Black men and women killed or severely injured by police violence.
Certainly. That seems to be the consistent theme, is that you're seeing Black individuals who are unarmed and who are being harmed by police. Use of force study, which will be coming out, and also just a preview that was given last year, indicates that Black individuals within our city are more likely to experience use of force by police and more likely to be unarmed. I'm not saying that there are definitely cases where it's warranted that police should use force, but generally when you're seeing this force being on members of the Black community, they are unarmed, and that's what the major concern is. So when we're continuously seeing stories of Black individuals being killed by police and doesn't seem to be warranted, that definitely is showing great concern. And this is something that we really all should be concerned about.
I would add too that, and Kanika was very right to mention, the pretty groundbreaking research that was done by the Ontario Human Rights Commission last year, looking at how Black people are disproportionately overrepresented in cases where Toronto police used force. I think what's interesting about that is that in Canada, we don't capture sufficient data. We don't have enough race-based data to really get a handle on what the problem looks like. And I think that could enable what many people are rightly calling out, which is this narrative that in Canada, we don't have the same issues. It's not nearly as bad as the United States. And to a certain extent, ignorance can allow that to continue to happen. And so it was necessary for the commission to use their power to compel data from bodies such as the Toronto Police Service and its board and the Special Investigations Unit to even get enough information. I know a few years ago, I tried to do my own kind of investigation into how looking at the race picture when it comes to police use of force, and had to do sort of like a library deep dive into cases and looking at pictures from the media and seeing if I could contact family members to get any kind of identifying information about someone who was killed or injured. And that's not good enough. We need to have far more information about who is impacted when it comes to police use of force.
And Kanika, you've been part of gathering that data too. You've published studies on this.
Yes, certainly. So I definitely would like to add to that. Gaining race-based data is difficult from the Canadian context. So a previous study that I have recently published looked at police interactions, police charging decisions. And really the only reason I gained access to this was I was previously a civilian with a police service. I feel that if I didn't have that opportunity, there wouldn't have been that opportunity to actually gain access to this data. I'm currently working on a study that's looking at perceptions of police among youth, particularly among Black and Indigenous youth. And even to gain this national data, this data is being collected. It is being done with Statistics Canada that does look at perceptions based on racial categories. However, the way that public data demonstrates this by grouping everyone together as a visible minority. And the problem with that is that then you can't disaggregate what truly are the issues within each racial category as in terms of what are perceptions of police. In order for me to gain this data, I had to go through a lengthy process of submitting fingerprints, submitting ID information, passport information, submitting a proposal as to why I wanted to look at disaggregated data that explored perceptions of police. You think that specifically for Canada, that this might be a way to try to avoid the conversation as to whether we do have issues that are quite similar to what's going on in the US. We are very open and we're trying to show that we are a very diverse and multicultural country. If that's the case, we're definitely not showing that we're willing to look into issues that may actually have an impact on our diverse and multicultural community.
I want to pick up from that thread too, because we're already starting to see that kind of commentary following this weekend. This idea that Canada is different from the US, that, our systemic racism is somehow different from theirs. I would argue that many people of color and historians would probably aggressively argue that point. What do you make of that argument, especially knowing, as you mentioned, that there is a lack of sufficient and detailed data of policing with racialized communities?
From what I make of that argument is that I think by completely avoiding the conversation, thus even gaining access to race-based data is really a political act on its own. And I think that to me demonstrates, I don't want to say that we're in a situation where we're worse, but the fact that we're not willing to have that conversation puts us in a unique position. And that's what the problem is that when you do actually start looking at racial disparities, you're seeing that we might actually have some similar trends that are going on in the US. In particular, when we look at our Indigenous communities, we are seeing in some provinces that the incarceration rate for Indigenous youth as well as adults can be as high as 75 to 80%. That actually is worse than some areas in the US. And we're not having those conversations. And so I wonder, what does that mean for us? Are we not having these conversations because it doesn't appeal to how we would like to be perceived in the world as a multicultural utopia? It's a huge problem that needs to be addressed. And when we're starting to look at the Black community, we don't even have access to that data. We have no idea what the incarceration rate is for Black individuals in Canada. The last time that a report was done in 2014 with the correctional investigator. And there was an indication that the Black incarceration rate is increasing. However, we don't know anything from that point now. So that was 2014, and we're 6 years later and know nothing better than that.
How do you fix a problem if you won't recognize that there is a real one?
Absolutely. And that's, I think, is what is unique to the Canadian experience, is that we really are avoiding that conversation.
We could talk for hours about this, and I just wanted to end on this note, and this question to both of you. Does this moment right now with Regis's case, with the mass protests that we're seeing across the United States, across the world, does this moment right now, does it feel like a landmark moment, a turning point on how we confront racism, specifically anti-Black racism and police violence? Does this feel like a turning point?
I would say I can kind of see both sides of this. I think there is definitely, Adrian, that perception that this is a moment where we will see some change. And then, of course, we're also seeing many, many people expressing that, they're tired, right? Especially within the Black community. I'm tired. That's something that's coming out because it does feel like there have been so many moments like this, flashpoint moments where it feels like we're on the edge of something really changing, and then it doesn't feel as though it has. And again, we see people being killed, Black people being killed in interactions with police. And so it's difficult to say. What I know is that locally, after Andrew Loku's death, there were really fevered and passionate protests that happened. There was a campout that happened outside of Toronto Police Headquarters by members of Black Lives Matter Toronto. And that was galvanizing force. And Justice Michael Tulloch did his review after that. And while certainly there are still many problems with, police interactions and police oversight, some changes did come from that. We do now see the Special Investigations Unit put out more information, usually sort of at the end of investigations. We now see a far more detailed report to understand, in cases where charges were not laid, how investigators came to their conclusion about that. We see images, we see far more information about what witnesses said. And so that was something that changed as a result of moments like what we're seeing now. I guess the question is that enough? It's an inch, it's not a mile. And so will it take more deaths to ultimately get the kinds of change that protesters are looking for? And I think the sad conclusion is that it might. And of course, no one wants to see that happen, right? So that's, I think, where the fatigue comes in.
Kanika?
I wonder what the impact will be. However, it has been interesting to see the influence and the impact and seeing protests going on in many major cities within Canada. And I feel like this might be an incident that appears to be the straw that has broken the camel's back. This is going on during a time of a global pandemic. And we are seeing that this is having a disproportionate impact on Black communities, the health disparities that are happening within Black communities. This is also connected to the policing of Black communities during the time of COVID. For example, we saw just last week in Trinity Bellwoods Park that there seemed to be a great deal of people that were there, then it really didn't seem to be policed. However, we're hearing from members of the Black community that during this time they feel that they are being targeted more, however. And then we see this incident now with a young Black woman who has died while police were at the scene. And I think that this is a situation upon another situation where the Black community is tired, that they are constantly seen to be the underdog. And I am hopeful that there might be a greater conversation, and particularly within the Canadian context, as to how the Black community continue to be oppressed and marginalized within the society. And it's really unfortunate that the pandemic has had to bring light to many of these issues, but it really seems to be starting conversations that have been expressed for a very long time. The hope is that this will lead to some type of change.
Yeah, none of this is happening in a vacuum. It's all happening at the same time.
Yes, exactly.
Kanika, Wendy, thank you so much for making the time for this.
Thank you for having us.
I'm really glad we're talking about it.
And that is Wendy Gillis, crime reporter for the Toronto Star, and Kanika Samuels-Wortley, incoming assistant professor at Carleton University, who has studied specifically the relationship between Black communities and policing. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Adrian Cheung, Saba Aitazaz, and Raju Mutar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattinen, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.